Lisa, and today I'll be sewing a beautiful Reformation inspired summer dress with you. You can already get a sneak peek of it behind me in the background. It is a beautiful, very flowy and floral summer dress, and it is probably perfect for occasions like birthdays or weddings. And while I know that a lot of us can't go to occasions like these right now, if you're a little bit like me and you like to plan ahead, then this is the tutorial for you. So let's jump straight in.
This is the fabric that I decided to go with. I found this while taking a short break from filming my last tutorial and was really inspired by its beautiful floral design. The color is really peculiar and I can't quite decide if it's lilac or dusty pink, but I can vibe with it. London is full of blossoms right now, so making a dress like this seems just about right. I immediately knew that I wanted to make something inspired by the brand Reformation. They make the most beautiful dresses. Reformation dresses all feature at least one of these elements. In general, they seem to have a cottagecore vibe to them. The fabrics often feature some kind of ditzy floral pattern. They like to add puffy sleeves. The skirts are a midi length and very flowy and often have a high slit. The first step for me was to create the bodice pattern. I wanted to try a new method and followed a blog post tutorial by In the Folds. I first saw this used by Wendy from With Wendy, just so you know, I love her, and wanted to give it a try. I will link it below. After making sure all of my measurements were correct, I adjusted the pattern. I migrated the waist darts out of the way and expanded the upper part of the front bodice because I needed width for the gathering detail in the bust area of my design. This is approximately what my pattern pieces ended up looking like. The center front was cut on the fold, the center back on an edge. The skirt consisted of 2 quarter circle skirts, one front and one back. The front skirt had a slit in the left half, and the back a seam right down the middle. After having done that, I started cutting my shell and lining fabric.
Guys, all of my pieces are cut out. I cut out my facing with this beautiful dusty pink chiffon that somewhat fits the shell fabric. And now I am about to sew in all of the darts. It's a bit of a tricky fabric because it's very slippery. So I will have to make sure that I do get the same spots for the dart ends. I'm marking them with little pins so I know where to stop. Okay, so this is quite interesting. We have the front bodice piece and I have cut out the same pattern piece in the lining fabric. Now you can see that this has a bit of a funny shape to it because usually it would look a bit more like so, right? So we have the success fabric here, which usually would go into a dart, even a bit more than that because I actually cut the pattern and then spread it out a little. Now what we are going to do is to add a little gather here under the bust area, which will then give us a nice little, you know, lifted effect. Put the lining fabric on it and then sew around your neck hole. Then we will be able to turn the whole thing around and the lining is attached to the shell fabric. So that's the first thing we'll do now. So now that we have sewn the 2 pieces together, because it is a roundish shape, we will need to nip the seam allowance in some strategic places so that we will be able to turn the lining the right way around. So let's see how that works. And that will then later give us a really nice neckline. I just gave the lower edge of the top bodice piece a basting stitch around here. And now I need to figure out how much to gather this for it to be the length I need it to be. So I will put a pin 5 centimeters from the center towards each side seam, because this is where the gathering will start. And then I will add a pin about 18 centimeters from the side seam, which means we're going to gather 7 centimeters of fabric. So now I'm going to add basting stitch in between these two needles on each side, and then we're gonna gather it. So this is where we started, and this is how it ends. Right, so the next step is to correctly attach the lower part of the front bodice to the upper part of the front bodice. Now we have these panels here, which they have the same kind of like, I don't know, double S shape. Now we will add the lower bodice piece, right sides together to the upper bodice piece, and then sandwich the whole thing with the lining, like so. The wrong side of the shell is looking towards you. You're sandwiching the top bodice piece that you've just finished, and then you have another layer of lining. So when you sew it down and you turn it around, there will be a nice seam. Now we need to pin it in, which is probably gonna take a little moment.
And here you can see the finished front and back bodice pieces.
So working with slippery fabric again proves quite difficult. As you can see, the two cut out fabric pieces of the shell and the lining look a bit different. They're not even here. I gave it my all when I cut out the pieces, but now in hindsight I'm thinking that it would be much better to use a rotary cutter on a mat like this and then cut out the pieces, so you can be sure when they all lie flat, there's no like tugging in the wrong direction. But I hope that through me putting it flat on the mat here and then trying to align the pieces as well as possible, and then cutting away any, like, you know, like this here, any kind of like weird excesses that move out and are in places that they shouldn't be in, I can somehow counteract any unevenness. But I will try now to fix that, hoping that the seam allowance that I added to begin with will still allow me to in the end fit into the dress. So that's the plan. All right, so to assemble the back bodice piece correctly, I lay it flat in front of me. I basted the lower corner so nothing moves around, and then I take the lower bodice panel and put it right sides together. Then I take the lining piece and then I sandwich the top bodice piece in between the two lower panels, shell and lining, and this is what that then looks like. Put it again flat in front of me, and then pinning everything together neatly so that when you work it through your machine, nothing slides around. And then when you take your top piece and lift it and flip it and reverse it, you know the thing, then this happens and everything should be put together correctly. Now that seemed to work fine. I will now understitch the lining so it folds nicely and lies flat, and I will give it a press. Good morning, it's a new day, it's a new me, it's a new life. No, Not really, it's still the old me. Anyways, so we've come quite far with our bodice back there. It looks relatively good, although I ran into a few problems, especially relating to the fabric that I'm using, because it's super slippery and it moves into all sorts of directions, also diagonally, which is a bit annoying and makes it hard to identify pieces once you've removed the pattern, the paper pattern. But I try to counteract that by, you know, triple checking everything and then also lying the pieces flat on the table in front of me and cutting off with the rotary cutter anything that seemed like an odd extension or something that seemed like it shouldn't be there, which I hope it helped. We will see whether it helped more than it did harm and at the very end once we're able to try everything on properly. So the next steps now are to start with the skirt and also to put in the puff sleeves, because we love puff sleeves. Puff sleeves are everywhere right now, so they're also going to be in the dress. And then also connecting all the pieces together, and the last step will be to add a zip in the center back, which I'm hoping to get all of this done before Sunday, because Sunday is my upload day. So it's first day today. Also, the coolest thing happened. Somebody contacted me on Instagram because they watched my milkmaid tutorial dress here on YouTube, which makes me so happy that people watch my videos. And she asked me how I made the sleeve pattern that I use in that tutorial, and coincidentally I am using the same pattern for this dress. So I thought I'm gonna show you how I made it and also gonna tell you the measurements that I used, so you can recreate it for yourself at home. It's super simple and it only takes a few steps, so let's get to it.
There are a few things you will need to do this. A piece of craft paper, approximately 40 by 60 centimeters in size, a pencil, craft scissors, don't do this with your fabric cutting scissors, you'll ruin them, and a long ruler or ideally a pattern master. First, start by creating a straight line horizontally to your bottom edge. If your bottom edge is straight, you can also use this. I did it by using a line that I knew was straight, in this case the left edge of my paper. Placing the pattern master in a 90-degree angle, I drew a line that was about 50 centimeters long. That's the lower edge of your sleeve. Find the middle point, so 25 centimeters from one end, and draw a line vertically from your first line in a 90-degree angle. It should be about 38 centimeters long. From the two outer end points of your first line, do the same thing and draw a vertical line upwards in a 90-degree angle. These should be about 18 centimeters long. Connect the 2 points, crossing over your middle line. You now have something looking like this. Measure 6 centimeters up from your bottom edge and draw a horizontal line. This will indicate where to fold the fabric to get a nice looking, crisp edge that allows you to thread in an elastic later. All of these measurements are arbitrary and I chose them to get the oversized look I wanted. If you want to create a sleeve that is well fitted, you will have to downsize this pattern quite a bit. The last step is to draw a nice arch from your apex to the outer points of your sleeve pattern, but let me explain this to you in situ.
The last thing that's left I like to do after cutting the first steps, and you're gonna see why in a second. To get a nice and symmetrical curve up here, I'm going to fold this in half. Now we have it on the fold, right? And this is also how you could potentially cut it out of your fabric. If you only have half of this pattern, you just would make sure that this is placed on a fold. I'm going to, by hand, create a nice curve. And now that is where I cut. I will get a nice symmetrical sleeve pattern. Here you go. That's your sleeve pattern. This is your side seam. So I mark it as side. That's your center front. It could be fold. So it could be, you know, cut on the fold, but it doesn't have to be. Those are the lines you will need. And now when you then go ahead and press your actual fabric, this is what you will do. You will fold the edge over like so. So you have a nice crisp edge for your sleeve. And you will top stitch that down here. And if you add, which in this case you would because it's a gathered sleeve, if you add a elastic, you will have to sew a tunnel here. But all of that you can see in my milkmaid dress tutorial. I hope that did help. It looks a bit like a little paper boat, doesn't it?
I gave the armhole curve of the sleeve 2 basting stitches and pressed the bottom edge like I indicated in the pattern. I added 2 parallel stitches to create a tunnel for the elastic. After measuring the amount I needed, I threaded it in. You can see an even more detailed guide on this in my Silky meets Bridgerton dress tutorial. After measuring the circumference of the armhole, I gathered the sleeve to the according length with my before added basting stitches. I pinned the sleeves in place and sewed them in with a simple stitch. Now to the skirt. I first found the center back of my back panel and cut it straight through. You will need this seam to be able to add the invisible zip later.
Okay, so I just put all of the skirt panels together. I already sewed the front seam, which doesn't go all the way down because there's a slit. And then here you can see the back seam, which I needed because there's going to be a zip in the center back. And now I will also go ahead and sew down the side seams, and this is also the point where you want to make sure that your opening at the waist fits the circumference of your waist at the top. So there's an exciting part coming up, and that is to connect the top to the skirt. And I will do that by lining up all of the side seams of the skirt with the side seams of the top, as well as the center front and center back accordingly. So let's get to it. Starting from the center front, usually I'm taking the top, and I will also need to identify the center front here. Ideally, you've already done that before, and I do that by simply lining up the side seams like so, pulling it a little bit like that. When I'm sure I have the center front, I nip it a tiny bit as well, like so. Right, so once I've done that, I go ahead and take the center front, make sure you have right sides, 2 right sides, and then you go all the way around until everything's pinned in. That's what it looks like. So now that I've made sure that it fits, I'm gonna go ahead and overlock all of these raw edges in the skirt. I'm so sorry, this is really hard to see. I'm gonna overlock all of the raw edges in the skirt the same way I did here, and then we can sew all the way around the waist, overlock that, and then we can probably put in the zip. Alright you guys, we are entering the last stretch. There is just 1 or 2 things left to do, and one is adding the zip to the center back. So we have our dress here. I overlocked all of the raw edges in the dress. All the seams are now nicely finished. We have the inside looking good. I actually kind of like this purple touch to the inside of the dress. You won't be able to see this on the outside because this is going to be folded over, then it's gone. But on the inside you have this funky little detail with all of the purple seams. So I kind of like that. Now we have our zipper here, which this is the closest color I could get to match this fabric. This is a really weird in-between color, but I think it will do. So what we need to keep in mind is that there is a front and a back to the zip. This is an invisible zipper, which means that you can sew very, very close to the teeth of it and then sort of hide it between the fabric, between the two folds of the center back. So you will have to keep that in mind when you pin it in. My suggestion here is to take the zip, make the outside, so to speak, face towards you, and then put it right side on the right side of your fabric. So I now reached the end in my skirt. Now what I need to do is I need to turn this like so. This is the inside of my zipper and my skirt. And then I need to make sure that I line it up correctly with the zipper and make sure I'm not putting it too high or too low. What I also want to make sure is that any seams that meet each other perpendicular towards the zip line up, and they're not like, you know, like this or like this. They need to line up because otherwise it looks a bit off and people will be able to tell that it's self-made, and this is not what we want. Although I'm pretty sure I've seen dresses in stores like Zara or H&M where there were faults in the way they were assembled. So people might not actually think that it's self-made, but just poor quality. And this is also not something we want. So make sure your seams line up.
After finishing the zip, as you can see here, I overlocked the entire hem, rolled it over twice and top stitched it down. And with that, the dress was finished.
Curious butterflies.
You mean bread and butterflies?
Oh yes, of course.
This was a tricky project indeed. The slippery fabric made me triple check everything and extended the process quite a bit. But look at how the skirt flows. I knew when I first tried it on that this final look called for lots of slow motion material, so here it is. I think I will enjoy wearing this dress a lot this summer, as the material, while it was a pain to work with, is extremely comfortable. I love the Cottagecore design and think it looks great as occasion wear, but also dressed down like this. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to hear from you, especially if you attempt a similar project. See you soon!